Sounds like someone is bitter. I worked in family law for a long time and I've never seen anyone but pissed off ignorant assholes support the idea of monitoring where child support money goes.
Strongly agree with this. My ex earns way more than me, she's just bought a 4-bedroom house, she sees my son for roughly 1 hour a night, goes out every weekend, I give her double the amount of CSA she's due, she does exactly zero to help me see my son, I do all the travel, this involves a 2.5-hour ferry, a 2-hour drive to collect my son, a further 2 hours to my house, then the reverse journey, and I never miss a payment. Meanwhile when I'm on leave I have to sleep in my car so I can afford to see my boy. I would do anything for my son, but I fear this is starting to take its toll on us both. No. Most of the single parents I know are just barely coping. Juggling kids, housework, often study and everything else. Someone thinks it is a good idea to add to the burden and make a stressful, hard job more so. Someone thinks it is a good idea to add to the burden and make a stressful, hard job more so. Make that bitch jump through a few demeaning, labor-intensive hoops if she wants to get her paws on my hard-earned cash.
I truly hate this question. My ex had a job up until child support was to be paid and he quit, 7 years ago, so he could cry poverty and have his support amount lowered. He then proceeded to have 4 more children and still neither he or his girlfriend work. He doesn't pay the support until I take him to court where I pay for a lawyer and he gets a county-paid public defender and he weasels his way out of jail time by paying a small lump sum. I don't need his money and I have worked 2 jobs to support my child this whole time, so I'll be damned to have to prove how I spend it. I mean, that money is meant to relieve the financial burden of having a child. So even if that money isn't specifically being spent on the child, it's taking the place of the money that was, if that makes sense.
Either way my dad didn't pay it.
I would feel as strongly as I would about welfare recipients supplying the courts with evidence of how their welfare money is spent. Oh my God, yes, thank you.
If a child's needs are provided for, I see this as a waste of time and money. If a mother decides to pay the electric bill, water, or groceries with it, she should do so. Paying child support does not make anyone entitled to be nosing around in their ex's financial life. I will say if the child's needs are being met, it would change the circumstance, so maybe under special circumstances. Exactly. I don't like how the question seems to insinuate that all split parents could be subject to this. If a mother or father gets custody but has a history of a severe addiction, or criminal behavior, then maybe a little supervision is okay, but someone like that would likely have a parole officer or a social worker.
How much money would it waste reviewing and verifying this proof? Yeah, in most cases it's just entirely impractical. Unless most of your income is from child support, money is fungible. An insane amount of money. And cheaters would still be able to fool the system if they really set their mind to it. So the proposal is pretty much awful. It sounds good in theory, but even if everyone could agree on what expenses should be allowed, and that would be very hard to agree to, there would need to be a way to monitor and regulate it, which wouldn't be cheap, so someone would have to pay for it.
Supporting a child takes many forms.
It would just open it up to criticisms based on nothing more than opinion. You took her to the zoo. What a frivolous, wasteful expense. Why are you buying non-gluten-free bread? Why aren't you buying higher quality clothes? Why aren't you buying cheaper clothes? I get your intent, but child support is a reimbursement in a sense, not a prepayment. That is, the supporting parent is paying back what was already spent on the care of the child.
As a kid of divorced parents, I think it's not a good idea. When my parents got divorced, my dad was a successful attorney and my mum was a stay-at-home mum with a little work experience in retail. My dad didn't want custody of my sister and I, and my mum really couldn't support us. She was able to use child support money to get herself a degree and start a career that benefited us greatly in the long run, as it set my mum up with a decent career. My dad and his second wife were always angry when they saw we had shoes that were getting old or jeans that were getting a little short, and my sister and I would hear about how he was giving my mum all this money for nothing. As soon as we turned 18, he summarily quit paying anything and didn't offer to help with college at all. IMO, no, I pay my daughter's father, and trust he does what is best. If their family is struggling with expenses, so is my daughter, because she is part of that family too. That's just how I see it. Now, if they went and got into a bunch of financial trouble that was just completely unnecessary, and he couldn't bounce back, maybe that would be grounds to get full custody through the courts. If he couldn't balance the budget appropriately, it would no longer be in her interest to keep her in that household. 100% agreed with this. At some point, lacking basic financial responsibility becomes a custody issue, and should be handled in those terms rather than via financial micromanagement. How much are you willing to hurt the majority of people that use child support correctly, in order to catch the people who use it incorrectly? How much of a burden should legit people suffer so that you feel like the baddies get caught? So, my so and I have been together for 5 years. She's 8 now. Her kid is like my kid now. From her kid's father we receive $40 minus $50 a week.
You want your additional tax dollars going toward an entirely new department going through all these receipts, verifying them with the support payments, then enforcing the laws?
Don't you mean, who's willing to pay higher taxes so the courts can hire more people to monitor everyone's personal life? It's like in 2015 when the Canadian Auditor General spent $23 million investigating questionable expenses in the Senate. The questionable expenses totaled about $1 million. As much as some regulation would be great, I pay child support, it's not that cost-effective to monitor amounts that small.
This would be an excellent way to make sure that a large portion of child support goes to accountants and lawyers.
I'm probably going to get downvoted, but to hell with it. Because it would suddenly turn that everything but bare necessities is an unaffordable luxury. My friend's father threw a tantrum when he saw that he got new shoes because second-hand is enough, not that he himself bought his wardrobe here, refused to pay for any vacations edit, Boy Scouts camp or repair his bike. This is a common argument from men who care more about their money than their children.
I don't think the government should be parenting parents.
I think the law would be redundant. Every child has needs that must be met or risk CPS involvement. Beyond needs are wants, and trying to codify what wants are necessary is a super sticky problem. Every culture and community will be different on this and would be impossible to create a universal standard. Thus, I don't see the point of this other than to give anti-government types something to scream "government overreach" at.
Neglectful parents are not going to suddenly become functional parents by providing an income-expense report.
Honestly, what the hell is Reddit's problem with paying child support? When my mother and father split, my mum could barely put food on the table for us and pay bills at the same time. So when my dad actually happened to pay his child support on time, it went towards things that support a child. Who would decide what was appropriate? My mum used child support to better my life. Sure, food, clothes, house, etc. But also special classes, books, the ability to have a birthday party.
This seems like an idea created for vindictive non-custodial parents to harass the primary caregiver.
Annoyed, the most recently released census data shows that. I can attest to my mother being part of this statistic. It's really not as black and white as people think. Maybe someone should make sure that child support actually gets paid, before worrying about all this. My ex-husband worked under the table most of the time. He managed not to pay the child support he often owed. When he died he owed $6,000 in back child support. Well, to be fair, child support enforcement absolutely is a thing already.
I'm against it. It's illogical to trust a parent's aptitude enough to award child support, but then to distrust the parent enough to require proof of how that money is spent.
I pay child support. I don't pay it to their mother, I pay it to my children. I don't care how their mother spends it as long as everyone is happy. If my kid's mother is happy, then they are happy. I want my kids and their mother to be comfortable and worry-free. It's none of my business how she spends her money as long as I know that my kids are getting the best that we can provide them.
So the government can now get into how private citizens spend the money. They already do it at the court level. Once the fair rate is determined, it's done. If the other parent thinks the money is not spent correctly, they can use the court system for remedy.
As a father who has equal custody but still pays an amount monthly. Spend it on whatever you want. I didn't divorce you so your finances could be my business. Withdraw my payment in singles and just have a bonfire with it if you want. I also didn't divorce you because you were reasonable, I'm not going to expect reason from you now. Family lawyer here.
It's one of those things that sounds good in theory but will be too costly and impractical to do. It doesn't even sound good to me on the surface as someone working in family law. The guys asking, "How do I know she's spending this on groceries?" are never the sort that would receive an itemized bill and be satisfied. This would just lead to, well, she's spending all of her child support money on groceries so she can use her own money to party all weekend. Look, I have pictures.
I get $273 a month when the state can even collect it from him, which has been maybe a handful of times in 3 years.
People who think this is a good idea have never worked with parents and separated children. I worked for CPS for 3 years, and people will come up with any reason to discredit people with their child. Kid has a bruise. Abuse. Kid has a braid now? Why didn't they ask me? Kid says he has a bad day at school? Must be being psychologically tormented. So, what all my ex-husband, the cheating bastard, has to do is see the kids for a few hours a week and every other weekend, but now it's my job to keep track of receipts and purchases on top of all the other shit I already do that he doesn't, just so I can show him what I spend child support money on? Yeah, no fucking way in hell.
I would be against it. And the parent neglecting their kids and spending all their money on drugs or whatever. That's any money. You stop giving them child support, they use any other money they can get for it. The kid's life immediately gets exponentially worse. The problem is not the way the child support is being spent. Tracking that won't really help. If mum, dad is an addict, they need help and the kids needs to be placed elsewhere if necessary.
I is happily married, as you can be, winking face, and my husband and I are raising 2 daughters. We both work full-time and have a shared account. I'm sure he has no idea that the majority of the money I spend is on them. In our arguments about money he has said that I spend more and write checks more. Yes, I do spend more because I'm buying for myself and 2 kids and he just buys items for himself. If we were to divorce, I know he would be shocked on how much he would have to spend on them, or how much child support he would have to pay. I think for the non-custodial parent it is eye-opening how much kids cost.
I once worked for a month for a government employer. We were housed and fed. In the past, people were given a simple stipend for their food daily. In an effort to be more accountable, we had to submit all receipts. To do so, we would, as a group, begin the process Friday after lunch and got back to work when everyone was done. One day it took 80 of us over an hour to complete the task. After that, someone else had to verify our accuracy. Long story shorter, no money saved, but a great effort in stupid to change optics for the taxpayer. At the end of the day it cost taxpayers the stipend, an hour of my salary, and the salary of another person to administrate.
I understand why, but it just feels like a waste of time and resources. They'll fake it somehow, or get a warning and have time to cover it up. Or any number of things that could bypass it. I'll be honest. My wife is paid child support every month and we don't really need the money. We put all of it away into a savings fund with plans to give it to our daughter when she's 18. Which is fine, you're just using your own money for support, so it's happening anyway. You're just getting reimbursed a certain amount. You don't need to track the actual dollars.
The court system does not have time to babysit everyone who receives child support. Thank you. I think a lot of posters here are confusing bad people and bad parenting with a bad system. If someone is horrible enough to mistreat their child, there are bigger issues than just nitpicking their receipts. The court system does not have time to babysit everyone who receives child support.
I know from personal experience this is a terrible idea. My ex-husband tried this while we were going through our long and drawn-out divorce in an effort to control me.
Wow, I'm surprised so many likes.
Definitely against it. There is enough red tape and bullshit already without adding to the mess. It would be a mess to enforce, prove where support money ends and your own income begins, and the courts are already clogged up enough with petty garbage.
No, it would be nitpicky and callous and would waste an incredible amount of the court's time and money. Not only that, it would create a new, massive bureaucracy and waste the time of all involved. It's one of the worst ideas I've ever heard. Not only would it be impossible to prove, but that's a disaster for administration checking all those receipts. We don't do it for welfare recipients and we don't do it for child support. It is much easier to, if you suspect them of doing something wrong with the money, arrest them for that. Criminals are usually stupid, since the smart ones don't get caught.
Amazes me the amount of overlap between people who advocate this and people who advocate having the government get off their backs. Get off my back, but get all over my bitch exes. Gov power is a cudgel I want wielded against people I dislike.
I grew up with a single mum that struggled to get by. She had 3 part-time jobs at one point and money was always an issue. The child support had to go to whatever was needed at the time, sometimes stuff like clothes for me but other times on things I bet people would think was frivolous. Perhaps the car needed to be fixed or something that's not directly related to supporting a kid. Having to document what you spend the money on would be demeaning to people who already are in a shitty situation. It sounds like something you'd hear about in countries we'd rather not compare ourselves to.
As a child whose mother received 0 payments from 3 months to 18 years, perhaps we should enforce just paying it in the first place. My father is still a free man and royal piece of shit tax dodger.
Sounds burdensome.
I guess here's my problem with that. Agreed. This law would look exactly like this. Exactly. How on earth are you going to divide up costs? The difference between 1 bedroom and 2 is $175 split in half by each parent, so $87. $50 comes out of the child support fund and the other out of the custodial parents fund. You order pizza and the kid eats 30%, so you do the math on that and split it from 2 different piles of money.
How would you implement that? A parent has to pay for food for the child and themselves. Are you going to ask for 2 receipts each time? What about the cost of gas, providing a home, electricity, internet, or TV expenses? Do you split all those up proportionally? I get the argument that the parent could spend all the money on themselves, but there's no good way to police it. Child support is supposed to go to everything that it requires to raise a child, which includes sports and clothes for them, but also a lot of shared expenses with the adult. A lot of people don't understand this. I've seen people say that child support should only go to food, clothing, school supplies, etc. for the child. Well, what happens when the parent is a little short on electric or water? Are they supposed to not pay it because it isn't listed above?
Because child support hardly ever even gets paid, so I spend my own paycheck on bills, soccer camp, school pictures, haircuts, etc. I leave myself for last, so when child support finally comes through, since I've already paid for everything for the kids, I might use that money for things I need. I understand there are moms out there that live purely off of child support, but there are also mums like me that work hard and rarely ever get any help. If they made a child support card that can only purchase child-related items would be useless for those that hardly ever get paid child support because those items would have already been purchased out of the mum's paycheck.
I would be for it in my own situation, as a payor, but it would take some clear-minded adoption of a new and likely technology-driven accounting system to avoid overburdening the judicial system with administrative overhead. That's the primary reason why it's never happened before.
As someone who worked in child support enforcement, the state doesn't care what you spend the money on.
I wouldn't be for it. I think that would be used as another mechanism of control for one parent over the other. But honestly, isn't this kind of your fault for having sex with someone named Lance? My ex pays his child support of $116 lol.
Any normal person who receives child support gets far less than it actually takes to support the child. The child support is the non-custodial parent's portion of cost, not just money being given to the custodial parent.
Do we really want the government deciding what we can and cannot buy for our children? Hell no.
Isn't the point of child support to raise the overall condition of the primary household? If they are doing illegal things with the money or are negligent with the child, that's an issue that needs to be brought forward to the courts. If not, how they spend it is on them.
The comments about saving receipts, keeping track of expenses, etc. sounds like a lot of work to add on to a single parent's list of responsibilities. It may not seem like it, but taking kids to and from various after-school programs, to and from daycare, school, and then working 40-plus hours a week all while managing the household alone are a lot to handle without the added responsibilities some people are suggesting. Just talk to your child during visitation. My dad would get mad at my mom because she would pay bills with the child support money instead of buying us toys. Even when I was little I was like, I think bills are more important.
I would be for it, however, the reason why no law exists is because it would be insanely difficult and expensive to enforce. Haha, no way anyone would be so petty, nope. I am an attorney that has worked on numerous divorce and custody cases. People would 100% be that petty.
It would be pointless in almost all cases. Money is fungible, so all one would have to do is provide receipts for food, clothing, bills, etc., which almost everyone has. I can't believe I had to scroll this far down for someone to point out the obvious: money is fungible. As a child support paying dad, I don't get these arguments. Is my daughter fed, clothed, and has roof over her head? If the answer's yes, good enough. Me and her G-parents can spoil her plenty. Of course her mum's cool and provides plenty, so no problems there.
It would be impossible to prove. For example, let's say Rob is the custodial parent of his 2 kids, and his ex Karen pays $700 a month child support. Rob gets paid on the 1st of the month, and receives child support on the 28th. The day he gets child support, he buys a $150 pair of boots, a $60 pair of pants, and replaces parts for his motorcycle for $300. Karen freaks out that most of her money has gone to Rob's hobbies. Rob produces receipts that show he spent $400 on groceries, $150 on summer clothes for the girls, and $500 in daycare. It came out of his paycheck rather than her child support. He argues that in fact he did the right thing as a father by providing for them earlier in the month and treating himself later.
Child support for the most part covers a percentage of basic expenses only: rent, utilities, food, clothes, education expenses. As long as those expenses which are disclosed to the court meet or exceed the support order, itemization is unnecessary. I'm opposed on the basis that I don't believe that government should be managing how private citizens spend their own money.
Very few people are financially organized enough to show that proof.
This would be terrible burden for a single parent who also works. Raising a child alone and having to keep a job is hard enough. Work for JDRC courts, and although this would probably fall under DCSE, their workload is already outstanding for how much they make and the hours they have to work. This would never work out well.
I generally think that would be a bad idea. Child support worker here, and this is just insanely unrealistic. First of all, supply the court with proof of how the child support money is spent. Yeah, How do you imagine that works? Monthly hearings? That's thousands of taxpayer dollars spent on judges, clerks, county attorney, CSSU, to just be present. Once we are in this prove your expenses hearing, how does the custodial parent then do so? Here in Colorado, child support money can be loaded onto a specific card, so I guess that can be tracked, but who deems what is appropriate expenditures and what is not?
People who have to pay child support often get all up in arms about how the money is being spent when really it doesn't matter as long the child is being adequately provided for. This is the most legally correct comment in the entire thread. The law sees child supports as something that belongs to the custodial spouse. It's not, here is my monthly support check, now go and buy things for the child. It's, this parent has custody, there's a minimum cost associated with that responsibility, and the non-custodial parent has to reimburse them for being the primary custodial parent.
I'm not crazy about it because, to be effective, it would require not only consensus on what's fair to spend money on, but also a moral judgment on whether or not that person deserves what they spend money on. Now just stop and think about how bad we are at agreeing on what's right and wrong on a moral scale. It'd be a nightmare.
As a parent, I think it would be very hard to account for each dollar that I spend on each of my children. Who decides whether taking a child to check each is appropriate eyes of money? Keep the government away from citizens' lives. Not only should the government not decide what people do with their money, they shouldn't decide who gets to raise the kids vs who pays for them. Children who grow up under child support, welfare are more likely to live their adult lives and raise kids under the same conditions, and so on, leading to more Democrat voters who see the government as a parental figure. The intent behind this, and the effect of implementing this, would be to see parents who need the money not getting it. It's a stupid policy, and it's intended to punish the recipient.